Hello, welcome back again. Welcome to our Regcast. My name's Tim Phillips for the Register, and today we're talking about desktop virtualization, which, judging by the number of you that are signed up, is something that's been confusing you as well as me, which is handy because I'm going to get it sorted out for me, but, you know, it's good if we share that information with you as well. Now, it turns out that it's not as simple as it might at first seem, but we've got two people, experts in the studio with us today, who are really going to sort it out. And they're going to boil it down to what's good for what. And at the end of the day, then we're going to say, which is the best way to do desktop virtualization? We're not really guys stand down. It's not quite that simple, but we're going to get as simple as it possibly can practically be. Now, who's with us today? You know who I am, but from Microsoft joining us today, a man for whom it's relevant because it's either him doing the desktop virtualizing or it's his stuff that gets virtualized, is Ian Moulster. Ian, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Tim.
Now, Ian, so I'm asking everyone today, because it's sort of the Christmas shopping season, what would you like for Christmas, you know, from the industry? Not for you.
What would I like for Christmas? Actually, I was thinking about, for me, a nice lie down and a bit of peace and quiet, but perhaps a little less mail would be nice as well.
That's good, yes. And also joining us from Freeform Dynamics, our regular contributor, the Dark Lord himself. It's Dr. Stats. It's Tony Locke. Tony, welcome.
Good afternoon.
What do you want for Christmas?
What do I want for Christmas, Tim? I think the thing that everybody would really like for Christmas would be a 6-hour webinar with you and me and another guest to really share the Christmas happiness of IT.
Well, you know, if you decide that you want that for Christmas, viewers, then just let us know on the feedback, and it'll certainly be one of Tony and me anyway, because you know, I might be taking some time off because, you know, I've just given everything this year and I don't really have much more to give. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn this over to you guys. Now, the most important thing when you're looking at all of this, I know you'll have a lot of questions, is hit that questions tab and send them to us, because then they come to my screen, I read them out to Ian and Tony, and Ian and Tony give you decent answers. Then if they don't give you decent answers, send another question to say, we want a decent answer, please. It works like that, but it really does work when we get a lot of questions. Okay, first one, Ian, I'm going to give to you. This slide is basically saying why we should be thinking about this at all, I guess.
Exactly right, yeah. Why should we change? Why don't we just do the same thing as we did, say, 5 years back? And there's lots of reasons for it. Perhaps just picking up on the top part of this slide, in the olden days, perhaps a few years back, people had a desktop machine. They might have had a few laptops around, but on the whole, that was it. These days, there are thin clients, there are tablets and slates, there are phones, there are other ways in which people expect to be able to get to the information they need. And in fact, that kind of links on to the users themselves. They have a sort of higher bar in terms of what they expect. So they expect to be able to get to their desktop wherever they are. They expect to be able to use things wherever they are. So there's a sort of expectation level that has been raised. And then all of that needs to be controlled by the IT guy, so he needs to make sure it's still secure and he can manage it, and it's still possible to keep control of it. So in essence, that's what the slide is trying to say. Things have changed, but we still need to make sure we can control and manage things. So those are the drivers for change.
Tony, you've been around in the business a fair old time. Isn't this still fundamentally the same problem we've been talking about ever since the mainframe days?
Not quite. It's certainly the same problem we've been talking about ever since personal computing came into the business. Because before that, the mainframes, even the mini computers, the IT guys had a pretty good way of managing them. Mm-hmm. But when PCs came in, there was a problem. It was the use of the word personal in the early marketing campaigns to position the devices. It's a personal computer. It belongs to you, the user. And the users took that possessiveness really to heart. And if you ask people about the things they use in their daily life, almost uniformly, everybody thinks that these beasts belong to them. It's not company equipment they're using, it's my PC, and I can do with it what I wish. So actually, the IT exercising any management control on the desktop, the laptop estate has been really difficult because people are very possessive about these things. They think that the minute IT starts managing them, they get locked down and they can't do what they want to do or what they need to do. And the expectation part that Ian mentioned there is really become ever more stronger. It hasn't diminished over time. And with the advent of all these new devices, it's not that people want to use them in business, it's that they expect to be able to use them. And quite often the people that first want to use the new kit are not the people you can easily say no to. It's the boss walking in with his latest tablet or his latest smartphone that he wants to get working. And you can't say no anymore. People want to work. There are different ways of working. More and more people are working from home or on the road. So we've got to support all these things. But getting that management in there is really important. And politically, it's always been a challenge.
You're talking about this expectation. Is part of the IT department's job now to say that's unreasonable expectation? They have to be that nasty cop, seeing as they're characterised that way anyway.
Well, the register audience tell us not. We've asked them this question several times over the course of the last year or two, and they keep coming back to us that no, what's termed the consumerisation of IT is really taking place. People are expecting to bring in an ever wider range of devices for them to use. And it's really coming down to how IT accommodates that. Now, interestingly enough, I did a webinar with some security officers from companies about 2 or 3 months ago in the summer, and there was a pretty even split between the CSOs there, between those who said, no, we're never going to allow this, and those who said, yeah, we can't wait to embrace it because it will make the users happier, or if not happier, then certainly complaining less. And hopefully it will make us overall more productive because, when people are happier using what they want to and when they're happy to do it on their own time when they're sitting in their front room rather than in my office, between 9 to 5, then that's good for the company too. So it's happening. The guys out there know it's happening, and it's a question of, well, how can we do that while still keeping that security, making sure that things are controlled and that we're not allowing information to leak out of the business or malign influences to come into the business.
And just to add to that, the other driver, I suppose, is the Windows 7 move. People are very keen to move to it, so it's a good time for them to think about how they achieve that and how, in doing so, they can address these new needs.
Yeah. For the first time ever, we're coming up to a desktop refresh, a laptop refresh on the hardware side that isn't just going to be linked into changing the operating systems and perhaps the applications as well. That's been the traditional way that these projects have happened. We're going to change all the hardware, we'll upgrade to the latest version of the operating system, although there was a bit of a hiccup with Vista there, so there's a lot of pent-up demand to actually make the changes. But for the first time ever, the business is realising we've got all this fragmentation going on. We know that we need to do a better job of managing things. Hey, we've heard about this desktop virtualisation. Can that help? So I think that this rollout, when it happens, for the first time, it's not going to be just take all the existing desktops, replace them with desktops, or maybe change a few of them into laptops. People are going to be looking, well, is there something more fundamentally different that we can do?
Well, now, the problem with that, Ian, is that when you're replacing a desktop with a new desktop and an old operating system with roughly the same operating system, only like a little bit better. And
well, a lot better.
Oh, yeah, we mentioned Vista before, arguable. So when you're doing that, then there's a sort of continuity in the way you're thinking. There's a continuity in what the users are expecting because they've got something that's clean instead of something that's dirty. And when you go into desktop virtualization, you can see from this slide here, you've got a lot of stuff to untangle as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. And the way it's traditionally, in quotes, been done is you have a machine, you install an operating system on that, you install apps on that, and you have all your user profile stuff, like your own files. And all those things are really tightly bound to each other. And that has been a good thing, because it means they can work well with each other, but it means that you can't swap any of them out. So your app is tied to the machine it's installed on, your operating system is tied to the machine it's on. It's very difficult to move that to some other machine. So the question is, well, how do you do that? How do you change that? And the way to do it is to break those boundaries. And virtualization is the way to achieve that. So what this slide is trying to show is that if you virtualize each of those parts on the screen, and we're going to go through what those bits mean, it does allow you to break those boundaries. So you can move your apps from machine to machine. You can move your operating system from machine to machine. And that's the key part of what desktop virtualization can achieve.
Tony, when it says solution here, decouple layers, that's a short phrase for a lot of work.
It's a short phrase for certainly some extra work, but the benefits of doing the extra work, as we'll get to later, are definitely there to be had. The interesting point is that the users really only care about the application side. It's something that the OS vendors don't always appreciate, that people don't really go looking for a new OS because they want a new OS. They want to run the applications they need to do the business. But really the bit that gives them all that comfort is that top layer there. It's the data and the user settings. You know, when I click on my favourites, are they there? When I click on my desktop, is it got my wallpaper that I expect to see? When I try to save a file, is it automatically going to where I always save my files, or I got to hunt around through the directory system to find where to put them? So getting that top bit right is the bit that actually makes the life of the IT guys much easier, because you get far fewer calls into the help desk, and we know that when change happens, you know, the help desk calls ramp up like crazy because it's just new and people don't know how to do things. So giving them the ability still to feel comfortable with where they are, and capture that separately so that when they do move to a different desk, they've not got to start from fresh. Not only helps the IT side, but it actually makes the users more productive because they spend less time really working on things that are not, in business terms, that important, like getting my picture up there. Don't have to do that. Bang, it's there.
One of the interesting, our sysadmin blogger, Trevor Pott, was writing about, because he's just been through a nightmare desktop virtualization migration. I think he didn't sleep for 4 days or something, so I hope you caught up, Trevor, if you're watching. One of the things that he was writing about a lot is that resistance from users, because they naturally thought that desktop virtualization was taking things away from them. That's what a lot of us associate with it. Are we saying that's not the case now?
It doesn't have to be the case. Certainly. It could be the case. It doesn't have to be the case.
I think that if the IT guys are really smart, there's a political game they can play here where they're actually increasing the management capabilities and the management influence they have over the machines, because it's been really difficult to get any management control of desktops. Technically, there's been tools to do it for some time now, but getting the business to actually let people do that has been difficult. Whereas now, when you can start giving people the feeling that they've got the same old freedom that they had before, but if they break something, you can click a button and whack, reload exactly the same application. When they go to a new machine, all of their favourites are back there again. You can fool people, you know, that they've got more freedom than they actually have, and you've got a much greater management control of it. And I think that's really important, both for the business people in terms of securing things, getting better productivity, as well as for the IT guys in having, you know, far fewer irritated users.
So let's get into the ways in which we can fool them, in Tony's words. And I know we've got 4 or 5 different models of this. Now, this VDI, this is what is commonly associated with desktop virtualization at the moment, isn't it, Ian?
Yes, a lot of people think this is what it is, in fact. And actually, it's not surprising, because it's kind of easy to get your head around what this is. So instead of Windows 7 being installed on a local machine, such as here, it's installed on a server somewhere else, and you connect to it. And you connect to it from this device, a device at home, anywhere you like, and your own desktop is there. So it's kind of easy to grasp how that works, and has a lot of plus points, not least of which that you can get to your desktop from wherever you are. There are downsides to it in that you need to have a reasonably fast network in order to connect to it, and if you're offline, then typically you can't get to it. So depending on what your job is and what you do, that may or may not be a big deal. You know, if you go into the office each day and sit at the same desk and run the same apps, that won't be a big deal. If you're on the road, on the plane, or abroad, it could be. So I suppose it's back to that point that it's going to be good for some of them, it's not going to be good for all of them, and it's figuring out who it works for and what else you can do for the others where it doesn't work quite so well.
The other interesting point is that, as you said, this is almost the way that people think that desktop virtualization has to be done. It's not the only answer, as we're going to cover.
It's similar in character to server virtualization, isn't it? In that
it's taking your entire machine that you've got already and just, you know, wrapping it in a file that you can access from anywhere, which has advantages, exactly as Ian said. But of course, when you're planning things, do you want to end up with, you know, one virtual machine image for each individual user? Because suddenly then you're using an awful lot of relatively expensive back-end storage to keep things on that were previously on cheap disks on the desktops. So there are challenges architecturally in getting that right and making sure that you're not storing too much information, keeping the image count down, the sort of things that we've talked about earlier.
It's one thing that's come up before in our conversations is that if you go through a desktop virtualization project, you're not necessarily going to be saving a lot of money straight away.
Yep. It's a lot of the savings undoubtedly come from that management side and being able to do things more effectively, have the IT guys potentially looking on more of the value-add projects rather than just keeping desktops running. And of course, with the whole user productivity side, because if something goes wrong, it's much easier to fix. They just reconnect, download the machine again, and off they're working. If they did mess something up, and users never mess something up, do they? No. It's quicker for the help desk people to actually get them back being productive again as users. So there are lots of advantages, material advantages, but ones that are very difficult to measure. So getting those realistic figures into a business case is tricky, but making sure you're actually architecting the solution right in the first place to minimise the costs while still keeping the service quality there is the much more difficult part than just replacing one desktop with another desktop and has it got enough horsepower to run it.
Ian, give me an example of someone who's like a type of user who maybe would end up with this and would suddenly realise that it had turned their working life into a horrible nightmare.
I suppose it's a traditional salesperson on the road who would want to make sure he can get to his desktop or her desktop and finding that they can't because they can't get a 3G connection, say, or it's too slow and it's really clunky to use. So that's the key part, I suppose. Someone who's out and about a lot and is not on a reliable on a network. And also, if you're abroad, what you don't want to be doing is paying 3G connection charges to get back. So it could be a big deal for them.
One of these virtual machines is not a small file to download and stream in 30 seconds if you're on a 3G connection. With the best will in the world, it takes time.
As Mike's just sent in a question, and we'll deal with some of the rest of the question for you, Mike, and it's a little bit later. One thing he does say is VDI is bandwidth hungry.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's a LAN system for your office, or maybe for some remote offices if you've got some good WAN optimization in between.
Okay, so if VDI is not good for everyone, let's look at some stuff that might be better instead. So this shared hosted desktop, Ian, explain this.
Yeah, so this has been around for a while, actually, under some different guises. In essence, it looks and feels a little bit like VDI, in that you're accessing a desktop which is stored somewhere else, but there's two big things that aren't the same. One is the desktop you're getting to is a server one, so it's Windows Server 2008, say. It can be mocked up to look a lot like a Windows 7 desktop, but it isn't. It's a Windows Server desktop, so that's one thing. The other thing is more than one person will be making use of it at the same time. Now, you won't be able to tell that. It'll look like it's just you, but actually a lot of other people will be getting to that desktop at the same time, which has pros and cons. The cons would be you can't reboot. Because otherwise everyone would reboot at the same time. You can't get as much control. The pros would definitely be the cost. Because you're packing more of them onto one box, your costs go down. So it's got quite a few of the same positives as VDI does. It has some slightly different negatives, and it's certainly one that's worth knowing about and just keeping in mind when you're looking as to what the best fit would be.
The way people know this is really terminal services.
Right.
It's the traditional Citrix terminal services. That's the language. I'm an old guy, so this is the way I think of it. And people know where that fits. There's been some places where they've tried to use it for the wrong user communities and hasn't worked so well. And we'll see some results coming from that later.
Yeah.
But where it does work well, it works very, very well. So the traditional call center type operations where you've got people doing a limited set of functionality that are static at a desk with good comms. And, they're there working on a very prescriptive set of tools. They don't need a wide variety. It's there, bang, done.
What does RDS mean?
Remote desktops as services.
So we don't call it terminal services anymore.
You can do. I have no problem with calling it that.
We can do, yeah. But it's, that's kind of like
yesterday's... It's kind of evolved beyond it, but...
yesterday's
that's
terminology.
Yeah.
But this will also then be something, if it is terminal services, it'll also be a kind of technology that a lot of IT departments are pretty comfortable with.
Yep.
They know
where it fits and works.
And know how it works. Okay. So let's skip on to something else then in that case.
So the first two were server-based, in other words, the computing takes place at the back end. And we're moving on to some where the computing bit happens at the front end on the client. So this part here, different names for it, people will know it as well as virtual PC. So this is traditionally where you're moving perhaps to Windows 7. You have some of those old apps that don't work on Windows 7 yet. They work on XP perhaps. So you have a virtual machine running on your Windows 7 desktop that's got XP installed in it. Your apps are installed in that. And it's quite a seamless as to how it works. It looks like it's just an app running on your Windows 7 desktop. Actually, it's running in the virtual machine. Also good for IE6 apps that are dependent on IE6. You can still use them, and it quite seamlessly switches between i8 and i6, with the i6 ones running on the virtual machine, the i8 ones running on the Windows 7 desktop.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that, again, a lot of people might be using without really knowing they're using it.
Yeah, it's something that it's very easy to get working. Again, you're capturing the entire OS and the application platform together and just running it when you need to run it. And it could be with older versions of Windows, it could be with another operating system completely, if you've got an app that doesn't run on the latest Windows version of the operating system.
You've cooked up your own in-house app, maybe, for example, and it's an NXP.
And when you built it, you build it on something different that you're not currently running on the desktop. Gives you a way of making that happen. Gives you a broader range of application compatibility, as it says here. That's the big thing that it gives you.
Is this kind of like a temporary stepping stone kind of thing, a path from one thing to another? Or should people keep this hanging around, all the time? Is this for the long haul?
It kind of depends what you're using it for. So if you're using it in the way we've described, which is an old app that doesn't work, then you would expect it to be a short-term thing. At some point, you're going to move to a new app that does work on Windows 7, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it also gets used for things like testing. So a lot of devs make use of these to make sure their app works on older versions or other machines. So obviously in that case, it's something that you use all the time.
It also gives you the potential to actually capture people's entire desktops that they can then take out with them on the road if they're going to not be connected all the time. Yeah. So it's another potential there for disconnected usage.
Yeah. What about cost for this?
So it does need a relatively high-spec machine. And typically, you're looking at 2 gig of RAM because you're running 2 operating systems at the same time on it. And, of course, you've got to patch those as well. Now, MEDV, which is the title in the words in the title at the top, so Microsoft Enterprise Desktop Virtualization is actually a management layer, which makes it easier for you to deploy these remotely and patch them and keep them up to date. So it's easier to do, but it still needs to be done. It still means you've got 2 operating systems to patch and control, and you've got to run them both on a machine that's got enough cloud to do it. So you've got
it's the management side that's really important. It's not so much the cost of the hardware. The cost of the hardware in all IT desktop refresh projects always gets a lot of the attention because it's a very visible, usually capital purchase cost, and it's there, clear, black and white. But the point is, it's always the management, the ongoing management, that's really the bulk of the costs, but those costs are relatively hidden. And that's why having the right management tools to actually let you do these things well, and making sure that you've got the processes in there as well. So if your estate is basically going to be running, say, Windows 7 all the time, but you've got some apps that run on older versions, you've got to make sure that you keep those operating systems patched. So it's an extra process, exactly as Ian said, to keep in mind that you need to put in there. So are there costs? Yes, but again, if it gives you the capabilities you need to support a broader range of users and keep them working easily, because again, if it breaks, you just give them a new virtual machine and off they go. If they've done some tinkering with their environment, as users are prone to do, and it stops working, of course they say, haven't done anything, but bang, start again, off you go.
There is, actually, I'll give this to you now because it's something that we're sort of talking about there, but it comes from the video. Phil was saying that the cost advantage for VDI is marginal at best because you're licensing the operating system. You've got to provide the server hardware anyway, so you've got the increased cost there. So, and also with this, it sounds as well, it's difficult if you're going to make a business case based on we're going to save you money, then you might be barking up the wrong tree here.
It's certainly more difficult because a lot of the savings that you potentially make are very much wrapped up in that management side and the increased security side and the better user availability to applications so that they can be more productive, all of which have undoubted monetary value, but they're really hard to come up with numbers that anybody will believe.
Yeah.
And so putting them into a business case is fraught with challenges, and we know that from polling the register audiences we'll come to a bit later.
Now, here's one of these questions that you guys generally answer, how long is a piece of string to? So I don't want that answer. just putting this in place. And but Martin's asking about the ratios involved in these costs, hardware versus admin costs. So what you're paying to set it up and what you're paying to run the thing day by day. Can we do that for these cases that we're going through?
I don't think I can do that on the fly now, if that's what you mean. But certainly a lot of research has been done into it. So we can point people at reports that have been done which look at what the costs are and how those costs are incurred. And, I mean, you're right, I won't use that phrase that you said I couldn't use. But it does depend somewhat on what your situation is as to which of those will apply to you.
What about you, Dr. Stats?
It's interesting because, as we just said, getting any idea of what your management costs are is something that companies are not good at because it's mostly people. One thing that should be done with all projects at the moment is to make sure that the management tool side is actually included in the desktop refresh projects. Because if you've got the right management tools wrapped into everything, then the incremental costs in taking any of these approaches, or indeed combining several of them together to support a broader population, will not be that much more, but it's a matter of actually sitting down and thinking about it up front. So there'll be some incremental project costs, or certainly project time, to actually make sure you've got the right solutions for the right people. Some stuff, again, that we're going to get to quite shortly. But it's very much down to, it's not quite how long's a piece of string, but making sure that you've got the processes and the management capabilities in there. And we know that if you don't buy those management tools that you need at the initiation of a project, again, from the register audience when we've pulled them in the past, it's really hard to get management funding for new solution tools, management tools later afterwards, because they say, well, what have you been doing up until now?
And it's very different. What's coming through very clearly is this stuff does not manage itself.
Nothing in IT manages itself. The only thing that manages itself is the ability of users to mess things up. That's self-propagating.
And that's always with us. There are a few questions coming through about, in this case, is it useful to sort of mix and match some stuff together? And we get into that later. Yeah. So, hold on to that one. Stay tuned, because we've got another couple of types of desktop virtualization to get through first, haven't we? I mean, get through. I'm saying get through, as if it's like a problem, rather than actually what we're here to do. Ian, yes, application streaming.
Yes, AppV. So it's interesting that we were talking about cost, because this is one of the ones that actually tends to have a very quick return from the investment that you make. So what is it? And it's back to that point where applications being tied to the machine they're installed on is kind of what the traditional approach has been. So how can you break that bond? And this is one way it's achieved. So the application instead is streamed to the machine that you're logged into as you requested. And it's a bit like watching a video being streamed, that you get the bits that you need to watch first, and then it streams the rest as you go. In the same way here, it streams the app to you. You start to use the app, and then it continues to stream the rest of it. Once it's all been streamed, it's then cached, so it can be used offline, so it's not just online. And it's sort of self-contained in this virtual space that doesn't conflict with anything else. So another spin-off benefit, perhaps, is that you can install in quotes, applications on the same machine that would normally conflict with each other. A typical case might be Office 2003 and Office 2010 on the same machine at the same time. Typically, you couldn't do that because they conflict with each other. Using AppV, that's exactly what you can do. You can run both of those. They're self-contained in their own virtual space on the client. And it's important to just stress this is running on the client machine in its virtual space. So it streams from the back end to the front end and then runs on the front end.
What do you have to do to the applications to make them work in?
So you need to package them up so that they can be used in this form. And there's tools to achieve that. Some of them will package easily, simply be done. Some of them will require more work, and some of them can't be done. So if an application typically requires a device driver, say, it would be very hard to package that up because the device driver would need to be special for the machine that it's on. Or if it uses some specific MAC address, which ties it to a particular piece of kit, obviously that can't be streamed. But on the whole, there's sort of 80% or so of apps can be done in this form. Some of them will be more difficult to achieve. Some of them will be quite easy to achieve.
I'd argue that the ROI, as it says on here, really isn't the main driver. It's all about flexibility. As I said earlier, users really only care about the applications they get. Okay, they need the desktop to look with their own wallpaper and things like this, but it's really about using applications. And so this ultimately gives you great flexibility in actually using the applications, and when you get the latest, greatest application, you can just stream it down. You don't need to go and patch every machine or upgrade every machine in the company. You just do it once in the center, tell people to download it, bang, they've got it. Or if they get a corruption when they're on the road because, again, something's changed, that they've hit something, they've downloaded another program that's maybe conflicted with it, this takes care of all of that. So flexibility is great. And it's all about getting people the right thing at the right time. A sort of collateral benefit that could come for some companies is something that may be not appreciated. But if you've got users who want access to the same application, but not necessarily all of them using it at the same time, it might be a way of buying fewer licenses. Because essentially, you could stream down the application to, the group that needs it for the next 3 weeks, and then when they're finished with it, you know that there's going to be another group coming along that wants the application to take the project to the next step. Instead of buying a set of licenses for those guys as well, you just take it off the machines that it was downloaded to, streamed to, and then stream it to the new ones.
What do you need on the client?
You need a little bit of code, essentially, that runs it. So there's a little bit piece of client code that gets installed. And that means, from a management point of view, as well as Tony was saying, you've got control over to know which applications are being run when. You know exactly when they're being run, who's running them, and therefore you only get the apps that you actually need. I think one other thing to point out on this, that this isn't just for rich clients. So sort of a traditional rich client device, they can be streamed to that, but these can be streamed to virtual desktops too. So if you're implementing VDI, you can stream your apps using AppV to that desktop as well. So it's not just a client-based device.
Right, so you've got a mix of technologies in your organisation, but you're doing some apps by streaming them.
Yes, and that's
then it's good to go for everybody. And I guess it's also good for if you've got a bunch of users who are coming in with all sorts of crazy devices, or decide to use them at home, or you've decided for a free-for-all on what they can bring in.
Yep.
This is a way to lessen the impact of that.
Yes, correct.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. So, I think we have one more case, don't we?
Yes, last one.
The last one. Okay, user state virtualization. I don't understand what this is.
So it's back to Tony's point that from a user's point of view, they want to think of the PC, or however it gets to them, as theirs. So they want the wallpaper that they like with their family on it. They want their desktop to look in the way they like, with the icons arranged in the way that they're used to. The files that they use, Word files, whatever it is, stored in a certain place. That's really what this is about. How do you, again, break that boundary that it's installed on one machine. Instead, you want to make sure that you can move from machine to machine, and that stuff follows you around. So when I log on to a machine here, I get exactly the same look and feel. So it feels like mine. And this is what this does for you. So your profile is things like your favorites in Internet Explorer, your wallpaper background, the icons that you've got, the documents that you've stored, all that stuff. And folder redirection means that when you save a file to what you think is a local hard drive, it actually then directs it off to a server somewhere else. It's stored there, and then sort of syncs it back again. So as far as the end user's concerned, they don't really know or care where it's being stored. It's just being stored. But they can get to it wherever they are. They move to a different machine, they can get to it again. And just one other thing to add to this, similarly to AppV, this isn't just for the rich clients. So this can be done on a VDI desktop too, to make sure that they have that same look and feel that they're used to wherever their desktop is.
Now, when I used to upgrade my operating system, and I was used to, as if I'd have people to do that for me now. No, when you upgrade a sort of operating system, there used to be that thing to sort of like take all your settings with you and everything. That used to take ages. That used to take hours. And I noticed you say it can increase login time.
Yeah, so if you're particularly talking about doing this on Windows XP, where and if you had some very large files stored, if you maybe had some video files stored, what it would do on XP was wait for all those files to be copied down before it lets you log on. What Windows 7 has done is changed that and improved that a lot, so that you log on first and then it streams the stuff down while you're in there. So it's a lot of steps have been taken to change that, to address that exact point that you've made from Windows 7 point of view.
Mm-hmm. Tony, is this useful?
Yeah, it's all about the personalisation side. And we mentioned earlier about fooling users. This is probably the thing they appreciate the most, because it makes the machine look like theirs. Mm-hmm. And they know how to find everything because it's the way it's always been. And so it's great from that perspective, and you've got the management control in there, but the user still thinks that it's their machine and that they can change it. And if they change things on there, so that they move their desktop icons around or they change their favourites list, it's all synced and done, so that the next time they log on, wherever they log on, bang, it's there again. So great advantages from the IT people in making the users actually happier with what they've got, which may not translate immediately into fewer help desk calls, but probably will, because when they can't find stuff, they go ringing someone to find out where it's gone. What have you changed? It stops the complaints being generated almost at source.
We always make fun of these sort of like users complaining about having a single desktop imposed on them in these things, but there is a value
it's a big
to
challenge.
giving them what they're used to, just if it's simply the productivity of saying, I know where that is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's much easier if you're comfortable with the desktop. You don't have to search for, where do I kick off the program from? How do I save my file? I've got to hunt through a whole stack of directories to make sure I put it in the right place, and then possibly I put it in the wrong place and I can't find it again the next time. Mm-hmm. So there is genuine value in here, but it does help keep those users off your back as well.
So it's not just about having a picture of your pet dog replaced by a picture of the chief executive's pet dog. You know, everybody, you know,
No. Yep.
Everybody has a single European dog.
Although, of course, there may be companies where they insist on having that company chairman's pet dog up there for everybody.
Yeah, if you work for one of those, then I suppose it makes desktop virtualization a sort of easier proposition.
Almost certainly.
If you've got that, but you're not necessarily very happy doing it. Okay, so we've gone through a bunch of cases here, and I suppose the thing that comes out of this is there are good and bad about all of them.
Yes.
And that there are some people who would really benefit from some of them, and some people who would benefit not at all and make their lives a lot more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the question is, before we move on to the next bit, how much do we expect to mix and match these?
I think on the whole, a fair bit. And one of the concerns someone may have, having seen these slides, to say there's a lot there, there's a lot to think about. Wouldn't it be easier if I just had one thing that I did and make a one-size-fit-all? Mm-hmm. I think the sort of overriding point is that while you could do that, it might give you a short-term gain because you don't need to think about it very much. You just put one of these in. What you may get is some pain because for some of your user base, things will be a lot worse. For example, the sales guy on the road would complain a great deal, whereas someone sat at his desk all day long might think this is great. So the kind of overriding point is it is worth the investment in time to think, well, from the types of users I've got, which of these is going to fit best, which is going to make it best for them and best for us. And it's worth doing that because you're going to get a longer-term gain from it.
The reason why there hasn't been a single-size-fits-all PC image ever has been the fact that, the users are genuinely different, to a degree at least. And so, therefore, having the ability to deliver the appropriate tools to the appropriate people is really what IT is about. It's about service delivery. And so making sure that people have got the right kit, the right machine that works in the way that they're comfortable and want it to work at the response they need is important. And we've always done segmentation in some form or another. This is just another layer of segmentation we need to do. Who gets a laptop, who doesn't? That happened in the past.
That's segmentation.
Caused lots of arguments.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing, but just taken to the next level to work out, well, what sort of work are they doing? What do they need? What's the best way for me to meet that? While giving the company what it wants in terms of security and cost control and better management.
Well, so now, Ian, you created this sort of board game here for us on how you actually do this, this special Christmas treat. Imagine the kids' delight when you bring this out after Christmas dinner. Come on, kids, let's do desktop virtualization now. Now, it's, seriously, though, this is a useful way of packaging up what we've been saying about what's good and bad. Take us through it.
Yeah, so in essence, what it's making that point that one size doesn't fit all, or you could try and make one size fit all, but you're probably going to get some pain if you try and do that. That's the message from the slide. It's suggesting that user state virtualization and AppV are potentially good all the time, that they work most of the time, whether you've got a rich desktop, a virtualized desktop, whichever, it's going to give you that degree of control that is of use, whatever your user's situation is, and also because both of them work offline as well as online. And then you have a decision tree about whether VDI is good for you, whether session virtualization is good for you, whether MedV is good for you, and there's a set of questions you could ask, I suppose, as to what your users need, what IT needs, as to what the best fit's going to be. So it's just really the whole point of the slide is to make that point that one size shouldn't fit all, and it just needs a little bit of thought as to what the best fit's going to be to get the best return.
I called it a board game. You called it a decision tree. I think decision tree is the proper name.
I think board game works.
It makes it sound more like fun. Tony, does this represent the real world for you?
It does mean it represents the real world very much, but it does mean that you've got to know what your users are doing. How they're working. So you need to have a really good repository of accurate, up-to-date information. Not just, are they using a laptop today, but, are they genuinely moving around all the time? Or are they just using the laptop in the office? Because we know there's an awful lot of laptops that never get out off the desk. What's the nature of their work? Are they roaming all the time? what applications do they have? What applications do they need? Have they got applications that they shouldn't have? All of that comes into this. So it's very much about getting that asset information and user information coupled together and getting it up to date so that you can begin to make some decisions.
How do you do that? Do you ask them, or they're not necessarily going to tell you the truth?
In the past, I did ask them and had to give them a very prescriptive list of questions on how to find the answers, because they always said they didn't know the answers. But now there are a lot of asset discovery tools available that are relatively easy to use. So it's become a much easier task. And lots of companies have begun to implement asset management systems, or part of the support desk system might include an asset repository on what applications people have, etc. So the whole discovery side has become much easier to do. And that gives you the beginning, but then you're undoubtedly going to have to get into some conversations with the end users to say, well, how do you actually work? Are you mobile and moving around? And an extra layer of complexity here could be that, on the client-hosted side, the virtual desktop side, well, do you want to actually check this in and out so that when you go roaming, you keep everything there with you and you don't need the connectivity all the time? And when you come back to the office and sit down next time, all the changes you've made get synced up again and checked back in. So, but it does come down to understanding your users and what they actually need, how they work. And that's something that probably may not be to hand in many of the organisations out there, but there are ways to get a lot of that information in very quickly, but then there is going to be a degree of conversation.
There's a lot of information we've gone through in the last half hour, so don't forget you can actually download these slides and save them and print them out. It's a lot black if you print them out, that's just the way you do it. But you can do that to save that, so you don't have to sort of keep playing us back over and over again on the on-demand, although that also would be a useful thing for you to do. Ian, on this, are there common mistakes that are made from your experience? Are there things that people don't see or the positions they default to?
I think I suppose it's the paying attention to just one piece of what you need. So are you putting too much emphasis on what IT needs? Are you putting too much on what the users need? Are you looking after just one group and thinking about them and not all of them? Are some of the common things. And it's the same point about it is a bit of a pain to have to go through that to figure out what they need, but it feels like it's kind of good pain in that you're going to get a good return from it. So it's not looking at the breadth of what people need, I guess.
It's good pain.
It's good pain.
Oh, yeah.
We like pain.
That's what we concentrate on. Actually, that's your thing, Dark Lord, isn't it? It's good pain. So let's got a bit deep into something I didn't really want to go to. We've got your now. Let's have, you've done some work with Reg readers about their experience, what they're doing now, which I think also tells a story, doesn't it?
Yeah. The first slide here does tell a very interesting story. When we asked the register readers, what do they think of the following statements, we can see that all the stuff at the top about making desktop provisioning more flexible, really. Quite a lot of people associate that with the whole desktop virtualization side. And it becomes easier to secure all of the good points from the sort of IT guy's point of view, which is pretty obvious because we asked the IT guys.
Yeah.
But beyond that, right at the bottom, we can see that, that the business management are happier. Well, there's a few of those dark blue bits there. The end users are more productive. Well, really, that's what it should all be about anyway. And I think that making these sort of changes, because the machines are working more often than they were before, having fewer faults that needed people to go out and fix. Users must become more productive. Otherwise, you need to, kick your users. Always good to kick users, but
metaphorically.
But again, the last one I think is the really interesting point that you were probably getting at there. That making end users happier isn't a major benefit or something that's intimately associated by the IT guys at the moment. But that is the IT guys answering. And from some of the things we've said earlier, I think that we can actually make, if not end users happier, because in truth, when I was an IT manager, I'm not sure I ever met a happy IT user, so a user of the technology. What I wanted most of all was users who weren't complaining. And I think that some of the things we've got here can genuinely put us in a position where that happens more and more. And we know again from other surveys that we've done with the register audience that when the users have less complaints about IT, they genuinely tend to start thinking that IT is working better, which in the current economic climate can have benefits not just for the business as a whole, because it probably is working better and the users are being more productive, but also good for the internal politics of the IT department and keeping it running effectively as part of the business.
It's longer term change though, isn't it? I mean, what we're seeing from this, Ian, is that there's a lot of the attitude around this is something, desktop virtualization is something the IT department does to keep itself happy.
Yes, although I think Tony's point is a good one, that it's very rare that someone will phone you up and say, actually, you've done a great job and improved my world. They will phone you to say when it's worse. They won't phone you to say when it's improved. But what desktop virtualization can do is actually improve things, because it means they can work from home, they can work from another office very easily, and they can get to the desktop in a way that they couldn't in the past. It's just that they're not likely to call you and say that. But they will call you and say if they can't get to it, or it's slower, or they can't run the apps.
And also in their mind, it not be wedded towards desktop virtualization. There's no reason why users should really...
Users shouldn't care about that. It's down to them actually being happy. The one thing that is of risk, of course, is that if people are working from home, there's a chance that their partners might not be happier. But that's maybe not the IT department's fault, but it's something to avoid getting the blame there.
It's a completely different case. Now, Tony, tell us about... This is what people are using. This is, we've gone through all these approaches, and there's a big mix out there.
There's a big mix. These statistics are quite old from the register audience, and we're going to update them quite soon.
Statistics.
Yeah, they're over a year old. But the point is that there's quite a mix of things that people actually have done. But as we can see, that the adoption that's been most broadly taken up has been the traditional terminal services Citrix side, which is frankly what you'd expect, because that's been a business solution for the best part of a decade now.
Yeah.
But again, it's using the appropriate tools in the right place. And again, given the nature of the people who answered this, we've seen quite a mix amongst the whole VDI, the client partitioning, even application streaming. We've begun to see people beginning to at least play with and test. The one area that's got a relatively low bar there, the one right in the middle, about doing a one-for-one virtual desktop on a dedicated, essentially a blade, a single server, is used only essentially in niche cases, because obviously it's quite expensive if you're...
What sort of niches?
We're talking about financial services, really, where, the really low latency to get those transactions going through as fast as possible, and the user can't wait for, the extra 100 milliseconds, because it does have a financial impact on what they're doing, the trading side. That's where that really gets used. So it gives them the management capabilities, but, of course, there's the cost of the increased architecture in the middle holding it, but they've got extra management, better security, can get it rolling again more quickly, but again, it's more expensive.
It's a quick question for either of you, can take this one. It's from Goethe. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. For smaller businesses, how does what's appropriate and not appropriate change?
Yeah, so we can both respond, I suppose. If you're talking about VDI, say, it's typically only cost-effective if you've got a reasonable size, so maybe 300 desktops-ish, that range. It depends. It always depends, of course. But you're gonna need a data center that can cope with it. The network needs to be of the right strength. So it works better at larger scale on the whole from a cost point of view. Similarly, perhaps with the others, but something like AppV can be done quite easily, and there's lots of ways in which it can be achieved. It can be done quite easily and at quite low cost. So perhaps would apply for the smaller ones too.
Tony?
I think that certainly all the research evidence we've done with the register audience so far shows that these things are more widely used already in bigger companies than smaller companies. But I think that going forward, there's a chance that maybe the uptake of managed services wrapped around this by local suppliers that can help make this work, perhaps with some cached hardware in smaller businesses, so that you don't need those great pipes to get things working all the time. There's lots of potential around this. So I think today, it's probably better suited for bigger business than small business. But going forward, the actual architecture of the solutions should fit many more organisations, as long as they've got the management skills to actually get it in and working and keep it working. And that's the point, that it is an extra level of complexity in there. And so there's more for people to do. And so when you've got the greater bulk and you're doing the same thing for lots of people, that's why the managed services part might have a role to play with SMBs going forward.
Now let's go to your next slide, which is not the one that I've got up there.
Now you've gone forward twice.
No, I haven't. There it is.
Yep, there we are.
The potential hurdles,
Yep, and as we can see, there's a broad range of potential hurdles. Nothing that really springs to mind as being,
it's not one of those big dominant bars.
There's nothing there that says this is the one that everybody's got a problem with.
On the other hand, there must be quite a few people that have got not doing it for 4 or 5
I've got
days.
several of these, and essentially they come down to the cost. So we're not sure what the cost is. It's really hard to make a business case, and making the business case, as we've talked with several customers, can be quite tricky. And as you had earlier the questions, if you're doing it just on a cost basis, it's probably not the best premise from which to start. But then they go all the way through there, down to things like we're not sure about we've got the right skills. But essentially it comes down to knowing which solution fits where. There's not a huge degree of understanding. We've asked the register audience several times over the last 3 or 4 years about how comfortable they are with desktop virtualization and making the business case. All of these things wrapped around it. And it's clear that there's still a need for more education and understanding to be put forward, very much as we hope we've tried to get to today.
These are the sort of objections that you hear all the time here.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to see what the results will be when those surveys refresh, which I know is being done, as to whether those have changed or not. And I think a lot of them are there's some that are grounded in people just not being sure as to what the issue is. So they kind of think it through and think, is that going to be an issue or not? In my mind, it might be, but actually when I try it out, so we have a lot of people doing trials just to see if they can prove or disprove some of these things.
There's a couple of ones that popped up in the middle there that are quite interesting. We've got the user experience, concerns about user experience is actually in the middle of the expected challenges here, and that's about getting the right solutions for the right people. Yeah. And that's probably based on trying to use terminal services inappropriately in the past. That happened. But also down there, we've got maturity of solutions is well down in the list of objections, which means that even a year ago, people were more comfortable that the solution stack was viable in a business context now.
If they're going to do it, they're pretty confident, they're reasonably confident.
If they could get the right solution in the right place put in properly, then it's going to work. But again, it's what do I do?
Yeah. That's, looking at these, like you say, these the challenges, objections.
Not just the challenges, but also the perception side. Yeah. So, not getting the business case and understanding where each desktop virtualization approach fits is certainly something there. But the other interesting one from the top bar, where 40% of people indicate that, is that they've got something else to do. And, that really is the...
There is always something else to do.
But particularly when it comes to desktop support.
Yeah.
Keeping desktops going is something that occupies a lot of time for a lot of IT guys out there, because users are genuinely challenging and we haven't managed them well so far. Hopefully we've tried to make the case that actually desktop virtualization gives you a chance to do much better management, to reduce that, something else to do side. But you've got to get some work to get it in first. So... hopefully that one will come to be aware there. But the lack of awareness and familiarity with the technology is linked into not knowing what fits where, but couple that with the fact that people think the maturity of the technology is actually there is interesting. So I think that if we can get the understanding levels higher, a lot of these will actually disappear. The other couple that come in there about additional costs coming in, there's always the hassle of migration. That's irrespective of the project, even if you're just doing a like-for-like desktop refresh. Getting the logistics of that working properly and everything in place on that migration, it takes time and planning. Yeah. And I've done a few of those, and I'm sure the guys out there, can agree with that. That's never going to go away, irrespective of whether you're doing desktop virtualization or just a straightforward PC for PC refresh.
It's terrific to live the life of an analyst now.
I don't get so many 3 o'clock in the morning calls.
No, it's more conferences by the beach these days, isn't it? I know how it goes. I know how you live these days. But so these anticipated benefits that we've got here on the other side of the coin is these are the things that readers are telling us that they think will work better.
And they're all relatively straightforward and easy to understand. There's the whole operational challenge side of managing PCs. Well, if someone breaks something, you can just essentially click a button, download them a new file, and that's the whole machine fixed. You've not fixed the root problem, but usually most root problems are people messing things up. Higher availability, that comes again from being easier to fix things and users not being able to break them and send out someone to a desk that might be a considerable distance away, even if it's only 59 floors in the office building or on the other side of the estate. But if they're 200 miles away and you've got to send a guy out physically in his car to drive there and get to them, that whole productivity side becomes very easy to get some real business benefits from. But again, those ones that are hard to quantify and justify on the business case. The better use of existing hardware ties in Probably less on this particular refresh cycle, given that a lot of the hardware out there is quite old anyway and are probably off maintenance and stuff like that. But again, if you've got relatively new kit that you want to run some applications on that perhaps wouldn't work, or you've got some older kit that you want to run the newer applications on that wouldn't work before, there are ways around this, and it gives you just much greater flexibility. And of course there's the one there about improving security. As you pull in more of this management and manage the things better, then hopefully you can increase the security and reduce the chances of losing stuff, particularly if you do some of these centralized models where you're actually keeping things in your computer room in the data center.
But here's my question for you, Ian, and it's a couple of people have put this question into us. If we're running multiple different types of desktop virtualization, aren't we just multiplying the management problem by 4 or 5?
I suppose it depends on the management solution you put in place. So one of the key things we've tried to do is make sure that you can manage all of these from the same tool. We use the phrase the same pane of glass, but it's the same tool being used.
That phrase, yeah.
I won't use it again. It's the same tool being used to manage your physical desktops, your virtual desktops, and all the types that are described here. So it's an integrated management tool. I feel like I'm using too many buzzwords.
No, it's fine. No, go ahead. That's the only really way, the way to describe it. But that is possible.
Yes.
To manage all of them in, from one central point.
Yes.
But you've got to make sure that you've got those management processes and management tools in place up front, as we said, because trying to get the business to buy them afterwards is always tricky. But the point is that a lot of your other management tasks, just physically going out and fixing stuff, goes away, because you don't have to do it so often. Taking along your hard drive to reload programs and things like that become not quite things of the past, but much easier to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So Ian, it's a difficult business case to make, but here's, you put on this slide here the things that really you can put into it.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a bringing together of all the stuff we've mm-hmm. seen. And the previous slide where we talked about what the pros were, what people think the positive things are. What this is trying to say is actually it's not just from the IT point of view, which is important, of course, and particularly important to the people who are watching now, but actually from the end user point of view, are they getting at least as good as they've had in the past? Hopefully something improved. So it's looking at all those different points. And it's that question you asked about what the common mistakes are, and perhaps it is focusing on just perhaps one of those and seeing that we get one of those things right. Instead, what we need to do is make sure we think about each of these points on this slide and to make sure we address them all.
A question a couple of people have come up with. I want to get to it before we get to the end. A couple of people are asking about video. Video is more and more and more part of the, what the desktop is now, yes. And we, and it's being positioned as something that we, for more of our productivity applications, be part of it.
Yep.
Video conferencing, for example. So, how does VDI work with video? Some people have heard that it's not good. How do other technologies work?
It's a lot better than it used to be, I think, is the bottom line. So there's some clever stuff that's done, some clever tricks that are played. So that video, for example, could be streamed if you're using a relatively rich desktop, it can be streamed to the desktop and decoded on the desktop. So it saves all that processing power on the back end and uses the processing power at the front end. We've got a technology called Remote FX, which again is all about improving the quality of what you see at the front end. It does that by using graphics cards on the server, virtualizes those and uses the processing power of the graphics cards to make sure your videos and your Silverlight and your Flash are as rich and interactive as they can be. So the bottom line to me is these things are definitely being improved, and it's something we're keen to invest in to make sure that people get the kind of experience that they've been used to in the past.
And even the thin client companies have started working on that side too, so that they do the appropriate amount of processing in the right location. So not everything does have to be done at the server. There are things you can do down locally to improve that whole experience. So were they good in the past? Not as good as they needed to be. Are they better today? Are they usable today? In many instances, yes. Mm-hmm. Do they fit absolutely everywhere? No, but I think we've probably made that case quite a few times today.
Yes. Yeah. So again, we haven't got any more time to make it again. So we've done all we had. Now we've covered a load of stuff today. Thank you very much, Ian and Tony. I think that's been useful. We got some comments saying that it's useful to have it all set out, and like I say, Remember to download your slides. Give us some feedback. Tell us if it actually was useful, because I'm guessing here. And we hope we answered all your questions. A load of them came in, so I had to lump some of them together. Please do take the slides away with you, and this will be available as an on-demand, so you can watch it again if you thought that it was great, but once is just never enough.
Maybe Christmas morning.
Maybe Christmas morning. That's very good. Christmas is really shaping up well in the Locke household. I won't be there. So thank you for tuning in. Like I say, hope you found that useful. My name's been Tim Phillips with the Register. Until our next Regcast, goodbye.